In Mexico, a recall referendum to decide whether President López Obrador's term in office continues is running smoothly so far. French citizens go to the polls in the first round of presidential elections. Pollsters show Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen favored to go to the second round. Israeli forces violently broke into different parts of the occupied West Bank, leaving 6 Palestinians wounded. Well, hello, welcome to From the South. From the studios in Havana, Cuba, I'm Luis Alberto Matos, and we're going to begin with the news. Mexicans vote in the recall referendum to decide whether President Andrés Manuel López Obrador should end his 6 years in office or not. This is the first ever referendum of this kind in the country. Around 93 million Mexican citizens are waiting for the 10th of April to be able to exercise their vote in the process promoted by the head of the state himself. The National Electoral Institute made a statement in response to the uncertainty of Mexicans and indicated that at least 57 polling stations had been set up for the electoral event due to the previous declaration by the entity pointing out the lack of supplies to hold the voting process. The referendum is only binding if at least 40% of the country's electoral votes, something experts believe unlikely. López Obrador has maintained approval ratings around 60%. And as Mexicans take part of this recall referendum, let's learn more on it with our correspondent, Eduardo Martinez.
In an unprecedented event, Mexicans will be able to decide whether or not President Andrés Manuel López Obrador should remain in office until 2024.
I think it's very appropriate because if he does not give what he promised, we can vote for his dismissal.
I think it is a very good decision because this way we can make a midterm evaluation of the whole process that the President has carried out. For referendum to be held at the end of 2021, social organizations began the collation of 2,800,000 signatures, which were delivered to the National Electoral Institute, INE, for validation.
It was born precisely from the social movement where since the last 6 years here in Mexico, it has been demanded over and over to have a tool of participatory democracy to be able to decide freely.
Once the procedure was concluded, the General Council of the INE approved the holding of the citizen participation exercise for Sunday, April 10th. However, under the argument of a lack of budget, the Council decided to install only one-third of polling places. 57,000 polling places will be distributed throughout Mexico. When the missing resources were formally requested to the Treasury Secretary, they were denied without justification or motivation, and with an austerity plan proposal calculated without technical rigor and real information. This process generates mixed reactions due to the high levels of acceptance that the President registers in different polls at the halfway point of his 6-year term. Some place him with 64%, others give him up to 70%. I invite everyone, April 10th, to participate, to go and vote. This is what our opponents should be doing, in an open way. Everyone calling to participate, and those who are against the transformation calling to vote. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the main promoter of the recall, accused the electoral authorities of inhibiting participation and of giving little coverage to the consultation that could define the future of his mandate. If this recall exercise has existed, for example, in the 6-year term that began in 2006 and ended in 2012, when Felipe Calderón was in office, the people who have had for it to be done and the people who have voted, and the same will have happened with Enrique Peña Nieto and many other previous 6-year terms. The electoral roll is made up of almost 93 million Mexicans who will be able to cast their vote. In order for it to be binding, some 37 million, equivalent to 40%, must participate. On Sunday night, the electoral authority will announce a result based on the trend which by that time will be irreversible.
Eduardo Martínez, Telesur, Ciudad de México.
In Brazil, protesters in several cities demonstrated against the policies of President Jair Bolsonaro due to the current hyperinflation that topped the years 2019-2020. Authorities reported demonstrations in more than 80 cities over the current state of affairs in the country, which experiences not only a rise in fuel prices but also in the rates of all the commodities and goods, which sustained a hike that left a part of the population in conditions of misery. The presence of young generations in the protests is vast, for people of 16 and 17 years of age are in the crowds asking to be given the right to vote so they can change the country's political fate in the elections due for October. The Venezuelan government reported that another group of people from Peru arrived in the country through the Return to the Homeland plan. Today, a new group of fellow countrymen from Peru returns after a new day of the Return to the Homeland plan to continue filling Venezuelan families with hope and joy, said the Foreign Ministry of the Caribbean country on its Twitter account on March 22nd. The government announced the beginning of a new phase of the plan launched in September 2018 to enable the safe return of people victims of xenophobia in host countries. Up to date, more than 28,000 Venezuelan citizens who had left the country have returned through this plan. And Shanghai has taken measures to deal with food shortages as the city entered the second week of complete lockdown due to the highly contagious Omicron BA.2 variant. More delivery workers have been able to get back to work. It was estimated that about 3,000 additional workers would participate in Shanghai's distribution of supplies. Shanghai Vice Mayor Song Ming said on Saturday that the lockdown could soon be lifted or eased in communities that report no positive cases within 14 days, after another round of citywide COVID-19 testing. China's top health official Liang Wannian said in an interview with CCTV that the current control measures, the so-called targeted zero-COVID approach, was proof effective as Shanghai hasn't seen an exponential increase in positive cases. Also in Shanghai, its largest temporary hospital, the National Exhibition and Convention Center, opened to enhance the city's treatment capacity for COVID-19 infections in its latest COVID-19 resurgence. More than 6,000 beds were put in initial use, and around 50,000 beds will be provided for COVID-19 patients after construction in other pavilions is completed. According to China Telecom Shanghai branch, the temporary hospital is covered with fast and stable 4G, 5G fiber optical broadband services and Wi-Fi networks, enabling 5-year disinfecting robots and delivery robots to aid the epidemic fight. Meanwhile, district-level temporary hospitals in the city now provide a total of 21,000 beds. Shanghai reported 800 new locally transmitted confirmed COVID-19 cases and more than 20,000 local asymptomatic carriers on Thursday. We are taking a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. Polling stations opened this Sunday morning in France for the first round of the presidential elections, with candidates Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen very close in the polls. 48.8 million citizens from all over the country are called to vote among 12 candidates. The latest polls of voting intentions show that President Emmanuel Macron and the far-right candidate Marine Le Pen will be the two most voted and will go to the second round on April 24th. In France, the publication of any results, partial or final, is forbidden until the last polling station closes at 8 p.m. local time, and is then when the media will publish the first estimates based on exit polls. So far, according to official figures, turnout dropped noon local time to 25.48%, 3 points lower than in the 2017 presidential elections. French citizens stressed the importance of going to the polls this Sunday to elect the future president of the country.
It is very important to go to vote in these presidential elections, in this first round, to elect the president who is going to spend the next years in the Elysee Palace. And it is very important to know who is going to elect the country and what decisions they are going to make. So you have to decide, and it is very important. As you can see, there are many people who have come today to vote. It is very important to go to vote to decide the future president, and there are a lot of people who can vote for the future president.
Main French presidential candidates voted in the first round of the presidential election. If Macron and Le Pen, as forecast, reach the second round, analysts predict that their clash will be far tighter than in 2017, when the current president defeated his rival with 66% of the vote. According to French political scientist Pascal Perrineau, there is uncertainty among the population, pointing to high numbers of voters who were still undecided or who changed their minds during the campaign, as well as absentee voters. Analysts fear that the 2002 record of the number of French voters boycotting a first round of 28.4% risks being beaten. And also, French citizens abroad took part in their country's general elections. French citizens registered in foreign consulates, about 1.8 million, can vote there or at the embassies. Meanwhile, French overseas territories have already voted on Saturday to take into account the time difference, starting with the small islands of St. Pierre and Miquelon off the coast of Canada, and then the territories in the Caribbean, followed by the French Pacific Islands. The Russian Defense Ministry announced the destruction of a nationalist battalion base where foreign mercenaries presumably arrived recently. The Russian army announced on Sunday the destruction of the headquarters of the Ukrainian Dnipro 1 regiment, located in the Dnipro region east of the country. According to the Defense Ministry, a Russian Black Sea frigate fired 4 missiles towards ground targets in Ukraine, destroying the headquarters of the nationalist battalion. In addition, within the framework of the special military operation, Russia destroyed 86 Ukrainian military facilities and shot down 8 Ukrainian drones. Our special envoy in Ukraine, Alejandro Kirk, brings us new details about how the population survived after 8 years of shells in from the Ukrainian forces. This time we visit the city of Stila.
This is a small town of Stila, north of Donetsk. For 8 years, this was the front line between the People's Republic of Donetsk and the Ukrainian forces who were trying to retake this republic, a self-proclaimed republic, in 2014. The people here tell us that for those 8 years they were receiving shelling on a permanent basis, based on nothing, they say, because there were no troops, there was nothing here. The troops were outside or the skirts of the community, but every time there was a fire exchange, the Ukrainian forces were shelling the civilian population here. This is what the head of the community said to us.
For 8 years, from the rear, we were frontline regard that is literally 5 kilometers and from the gray zone. They were hitting us. We don't know why, because we have no military in town and everybody is in the field, in the crops, in the trench, but not in town. Why was this done? We don't know.
That's it from Stila, north of Donetsk.
The Russian government denounced on Saturday that Ukrainian nationalists are preparing new intentional actions to hold Moscow responsible for the murder of civilians in the city of Irpin in the Kiev Oblast. Russian Defense Ministry spokesman Igor Konashenkov denounced that agents of the Ukrainian Security Service plan to transfer bodies of civilians who perished after Ukrainian artillery attacks from a morgue to the basement of a building outside the city. The official also said that they are planning another stage action in a forest in which they would have presumably killed members of a Russian reconnaissance group, which would have been sent to Irpin to kill witnesses of alleged war crimes by Russian troops. The purpose of such stage actions will be to prepare videos to be broadcast through Western media. The government of China stressed that the United States has no right to accuse any other country of human rights violations. On Friday, during a press conference, the spokesman of China's Foreign Ministry Zhao Lijian announced that the United States counterintelligence agency established clandestine sites in several countries with the excuse of its alleged war against terrorism. The spokesman also called on the U.S. government to consider these crimes taking place in those secret detention centers and to open investigations against the agents that run them. Zhao Lijian pointed out that despite the human rights violations at these centers, no agents have been prosecuted and accused the U.S. government of covering up the crimes of illegal detention and torture committed by its personnel.
So far, no U.S. official has been held accountable for masterminding, authorizing or implementing the secret detentions and torture program. The U.S. government has gone to even greater lengths to cover up and deny these crimes and human rights violations. The U.S. clandestine sites around the world fully indicate that the U.S. has no right to point fingers at others in the name of democracy and human rights. What the U.S. must do is immediately dismantle its clandestine sites around the world, seriously reflect on its crimes, apologize to and compensate the victims, and hold those who authorize and carry out the tortures accountable.
Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has called a federal election for May 21st. The PM's ruling coalition holds 76 seats in the House of Representatives, the minimum needed to retain power. Polls suggested there will be a change of government with the opposition Labour Party led by Anthony Albanese tipped to take office.
His Excellency the Governor-General and advised him to call an election for the House of Representatives and half of the Senate on May 21. And he accepted my advice. And I know Australians have been through a very tough time. I also know that Australia continues to face very tough challenges in the years ahead. Earlier today...
We have more news coming up after our final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. On Sunday, Israeli forces raided different parts of the occupied West Bank, leaving 6 people wounded. The Palestinian news agency WAFA reported that 23 people were arrested, including 2 children, during several raids on Saturday night. In the city of Jenin, Israeli forces fired live rounds, stun grenades, and tear gas, injuring 2 Palestinians in the pelvis and back who required emergency transport to a nearby hospital. Meanwhile, in Jabad village, Israeli forces raided and ransacked several houses and stores, destroying their contents before arresting 9 Palestinians. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett granted the security forces full freedom of action following a deadly shooting in Tel Aviv, the latest in a surge of attacks.
We will be at every place, at any time, as needed to cut off these terror attacks. Israel is going to on the offensive. During the weekend, we conduct a situation assessment. The EDF, Shin Bet, and police are operating around the clock in order to restore security and cut off this wave of terror. I repeat, there are no restrictions whatsoever on the EDF and Shin Bet and other security forces in the war against terror.
Syria's air defense forces fended off an Israeli missile attack targeting the central region of the Arab country. The Israeli Air Force launched a targeted attack aimed at the province of Hama. The Syrian air defense forces managed to shoot down most of the projectiles. However, there were reports of property damage. Syrian authorities reported that no lives were lost. Israel is systematically attacking Syrian territory despite Damascus' numerous complaints to the United Nations Security Council that these actions violate its sovereignty and threatens regional stability. Iran's foreign minister said on Sunday that Washington is imposing new conditions in the negotiations to restore the 2015 nuclear agreement. Hossein Amir Abdollahian stated the United States is interested in proposing and imposing new conditions outside the negotiations. The foreign minister also mentioned that in the last 2 or 3 weeks, the White House has made excessive demands that contradict some paragraph of the text. Iran has been engaged for a year in negotiations with France, Germany, Britain, Russia, and China directly, and the United States indirectly in the Austrian capital to revive the deal, known formally as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. The 2015 agreement gave Iran sanctions relief in exchange for curbs on its nuclear program to guarantee that Tehran could not develop a nuclear weapon, something it has always denied wanting to do. Imran Khan saw the end of his government as Prime Minister of Pakistan after losing a no-confidence motion in Parliament promoted by the opposition. The no-confidence motion submitted by opposition parties was backed by 174 lawmakers in the 342-member lower house. The vote began at midnight just after the head of Pakistan's National Assembly, Asad Kaiser, submitted his resignation claiming that he could not be part of a foreign conspiracy. Khan, who had already succeeded in preventing the vote on the motion from being held a week ago, says to have proof of the conspiracy, for which he pointed directly to the United States following his trip to Moscow to meet with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Lawmakers will vote to elect a new Prime Minister on April 11th.
Tashrif Rakhein, 174 members have recorded their votes in favor of the resolution. Consequently, the resolution for vote of no confidence against Mr. Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Islamic Republic of Pakistan, has been passed by a majority of the total membership of the National Assembly.
A massive anti-government street protest demanding Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's resignation has turned into an all-night vigil as over 10,000 demonstrators gather at the Galfast Green Urban Park amidst the unprecedented economic crisis in the island nation. Sri Lanka is facing its worst economic crisis since gaining independence from the United Kingdom in 1948. People have been protesting for a week over lengthy power cuts and shortage of gas, food and other basic goods. Protesters from all walks of life marched into Galfais where Rajapaksa Secretariat is located. By late Saturday, the main Gala road was completely blocked, with protesters bringing the traffic to a standstill. Demonstrators claimed that mobile phone signals had been jammed in the area. The protesters included dozens of Muslims who sat in the middle of a blockaded road to break their Ramadan fast. We have come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For Telesur English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.